Welcome to On Rails, the podcast where we dig into the technical decisions behind building and maintaining production Ruby on Rails apps. And I'm your host, Robby Russell. I run Planet Argon, and for over 20 years, we've helped teams maintain and evolve long-lived Rails apps, so I tend to approach these conversations through that lens. In this episode, I'm joined by Brian Scanlan, who's a senior principal engineer at Intercom. Brian's been working on something pretty wild lately, turning Claude Code into a full-stack engineering platform inside of Intercom. We're talking about a system with over 100 internal skills, hooks that enforce engineering workflows, and even read-only access to production Rails data, used not just by engineers, but by product managers, support, and design teams. In our conversation, we also dig into what happens when your CI pipeline starts to melt, and how that led to rethinking the entire development lifecycle, and what it actually takes to build world-class AI-assisted workflows on top of an existing Rails codebase. Brian is from Dublin, Ireland, but happened to join us from Intercom's San Francisco offices. All right, check for your belongings. All aboard. Brian Scanlan, welcome to On Rails.
Cheers, Robby. It's great to be here.
So I have to start off the conversation, like I ask all these conversations, is Brian, what keeps you on Rails?
Sure. Well, Intercom is a 15-year-old B2B SaaS with millions of lines of code. And so, most of this is in the Rails app, and it's a lot of effort to break it up into microservices. Obviously, this would be something we would love to do. No, I joke. We love the expressiveness, the ease of use, and just the normal reasons why people love Ruby on Rails, in that, it's so easy to get started. It's kind of meeting you where you are and not through a load of boilerplate. And it allows our developers to really focus on building product and not learn gigantic frameworks, build complex microservices and things like that. We think the Rails philosophy and having a single application where we put most of our logic, we think it's very consistent with our approach to engineering in general. We're a principled organization, and what has worked well for us over the years has been to be technically conservative. And the way that this comes out in practice is that we end up with large applications where we inject all of the smart stuff that we put in place to make sure that people are as productive as possible, and they have to think as little as possible on all of the gunge and undifferentiated heavy lifting, and they can spend their time considering and shipping great product.
I like that. There's your case study for Ruby on Rails there. I don't know if I've heard technically conservative. Yeah, I like that framing. Where do you distinguish that between, say, boring?
I love boring. Dan McKinley, he's ex-Etsy. He wrote this blog post a good while ago at this point called Choose Boring Technology. And that was a deeply influential piece of writing. He's also written a bunch of other great stuff that I refer back to constantly. It's one of the blog posts or a series of blog posts that every so often I just remind myself, I need to read that as a refresher. It's this stuff is gold. But yeah, Choose Boring Technology came out of Dan McKinley's experience at Etsy, where you just build things on top of a bunch of boring, well-understood components. You don't really need to think about it after that point, in that somebody else will probably scale it. The work will be absorbed as part of the greater effort to, say, keep the MySQL layer running well or the Rails app running well. Whereas if you're on a team, you're making a choice around what technologies to use, and you're using some pretty cool bespoke or custom or unique technology that's really, really well suited to the problem at hand, then, it's like owning a pet at that point. You now have to maintain that thing and feed it. And it's not the worst approach in the world, as in it's better than doing nothing. But I think that in most businesses, sticking with a well understood set of technologies that you invest in deeply and understand them well, that just gives everybody back more throughput, more time to build product. But you get to do things at a higher quality as well. It's hard enough to scale one database. I can't think of how hard it would be to scale 3 different databases if all your teams kind of picked different databases. So the way we articulate that in our environment is being technically conservative. It's the articulation of what we have done that has served us so well in the last 15 years of Intercom.
Before we go a lot deeper into some of the topics I wanted to have you on for our listeners that might not know much about your role or at Intercom, but what are you actually responsible day to day as within your role there at Intercom?
Sure. Well, these days it just feels like I'm some sort of Claude Code evangelist or whisperer. But so I've been at Intercom for 12 years. I work on our platform group. In practice, this means that I care about Intercom's availability, performance, cost, security, and developer productivity. So everything that it takes for Intercom to be online, to being built well, to being secure, cost efficient, all of that. And so I work across all parts of engineering and beyond to help out. I'm happy to do everything from on-call to interviews to high-level architecture work or whatever. But yeah, because developer productivity falls under my teams, and we take care of our monoliths and we take care of our developer environments. And I guess my team, my group, we're like strong culture carriers inside of Intercom, and we're quite influential. Over the last couple of years, when it's come to the adoption and rollout of AI in Intercom, which we are very bullish on and making good progress, me and my team have been really pushing on this and doing a huge amount of enablement work, research work, and getting results. It's working out well for us so far, though we're still incredibly impatient and really, really want a lot more out of the system. But yeah, we're having some good results.
Well, that tracks. I think just for our listeners a little bit more, like who might not have an opportunity to work at an organization that has a platform team or a team that's specifically focused on those challenges versus being like, we're building the tool, we're building our app, we're working on our app, if we want to improve it, we're the ones that have to do it because we're the ones that live and breathe in it every day. And like, is it safe to assume that like the platform team is also responsible for figuring out like Rails upgrades, or who owns these types of things there?
So we definitely own Rails upgrades and beyond. We consider like the point of handoff between ourselves and our product teams who build inside of the app to be, well, certainly a lot deeper than just the current version of Rails, but all the way to, say, the interfaces that they're working with, whether it's at the architecture and implementation level. So if it's asynchronous workers or our web servers or all of the glue, the kind of patterns that need to evolve and emerge to do that, my team's own the observability, the design, implementation, features, just everything. And so we have, I guess, hundreds of engineers building on top of this software, and we make sure that the Rails app and a few other apps as well, we have a bunch of front-end stuff as well, is all architected to suit and be optimized for the use case. So like we take care of everything from the AWS account all the way up to writing and owning a lot of Rails code in order to support the application. And then we partner and pair with them on any kind of operational issue or database upgrade, database optimization, query optimization, all of this. And we do a lot of proactive work in the area. So it's not a case of like we treat our Rails app as like a black box and people come to us with their problems. We own the problems, and we will, in some cases, change how the application works or our features work in order to make sure that like we are cost effective or performant, or that we're unblocking upgrades, whatever is necessary.
Is there like a concept of like a DBA type of role there? What you're talking about from the platform, it reminds me of like my early era of my career where there were a couple of people that were, let's say, own the database. And like if we wanted to add new features, we had new columns or whatever, we had to kind of negotiate that with them. And they would be like, all right, well, here's what you actually can have. Here's how you can integrate with it. Here's the store procedures to update, things like that. If someone's building out new functionality in the Rails app, how much collaboration does that team have with your team to plan that out? Or are they able to just build a typical Rails thing and you'll come back and I would say retroactively optimize that? But how does that kind of work there?
Yeah, so we want to make it as seamless as possible. And so that people can just use the regular migration mechanisms, the regular Rails mechanisms, in order to get their code working in production as easily as they can in a more simple environment. The way we go about this is, so we don't staff our team with sysadmins or DBAs or anything. And this is a little ironic because I probably identify as like a sysadmin, SRE in my own kind of background. But we are typically staffed with product engineers. The usual way that people join our teams is that they would be a regular product engineer building customer-facing features inside of Intercom, and they start to get into like some niches, or they start to like do a bit of work. They might end up doing some database performance work or whatever, and they'll also see how great my teams are, and just go like, I want to work with those people. As in, I want to change my career or change the direction I'm working in to go, like, say, deeper in these areas, whether it's deployments or databases or Rails in particular. And so that's how we recruit. And like, we don't hire in specialist knowledge. And this is true across all of our product engineering roles. We don't tend to hire Rails people, for example, or look just for product engineers with 10 years Ruby on Rails background and experience. Now, for sure, we definitely need a decent bench of people who have got this depth and knowledge and experience. But we find that hiring generalists who can go deep in particular areas, willing to learn, willing to throw themselves into those areas, works better, both from like a generalized hiring into the product engineering role, but then also into the platform groups. I think getting people who want to build for themselves as such and want to go deeper into those areas, but are, legit software developers who understand Intercom and get stuff done, that's the ideal person to join our groups.
Reflecting on your role there, what types of things keep you up in your role up at night?
Well, today we're not moving fast enough on AI adoption, which
of all companies, you're not moving fast.
No,
enough,
we're
relative.
Relatively speaking, we're not bad. And I talk to a lot of other companies, and I'd say we're probably up in the very high percentiles. But it's not good enough, and it's like we have a lot of anxiety that, say, companies we're competing against, they mightn't have the same headwinds. For all that I love about the Ruby on Rails monolith with all its code and tests and stuff like that, if you're working on a greenfield company or a greenfield environment, you haven't got all the baggage that we have, all of the kind of complex features that we've built over 15 years, all of the different styles of code in our coding base. Well, they mightn't have revenue, but revenue is good. But the production of code is and production of features and our ability to do that incredibly fast and accurately, that's my job, or like part of my job. And we cannot afford to be held back by, we've got 1 million lines of code, therefore it takes Claude Code 5 times as long to kind of get out something that's good or whatever. Like, it's kind of unacceptable. So we're paranoid about the headwinds. We also know that, if the tools don't improve at all, like, we're on a path to basically assembling kind of Voltron style, a load of Claude Code skills and guidance and stuff like that can do the job of like the vast majority of things that a product engineer does in Intercom. And so we're impatient to get, we need to finish this. There's a lot of work to do. Turns out that humans do a lot of work. It's like trying to move as fast as possible to get as much coverage, but maintain a super high quality bar with the transformation to AI, because I'm not that worried that we're going to go down too many paths. I think you can notice when things are going bad, but I want to get this stuff right first time. And so we're on a big transformation. It's just a lot of work, changing how hundreds of people work. It's a huge amount of effort.
No. So for some context for our listeners, prior to this conversation, Brian recently wrote an article. I forget, actually, of all the things I didn't write down was the actual name of the article, but what was it off the top of my head?
It was just a tweet thread.
Okay.
Yeah, it went out to a few different places. I think it got called "How We Use Claude Code Today at Intercom."
Anyways, I read that, and I was like, I need to talk to Brian again. It's been a while since we chatted. I had it on my other podcast a couple of years ago. But the thing that stood out to me was that how much pressure your CI system was under. To the point where it was like maybe starting to break down. So maybe you can walk us through what was going on there.
Yeah, so this is one of those success stories. Very often, like, a lot of my job is unblocking people or giving them permission to do things. And I'll say something like, if that problem happens, some problem of success or saturation or scale, well, clearly we'll have been wildly successful. And the first thing we should do is throw a big party. And then we figure out how to fix the problem. And in this case, the wild success was that we were on a rapidly increasing rate of throughput in terms of pull requests going through our system. We have a large test suite for our Rails monolith in the order of hundreds of thousands of tests. And it was taking about 2.5 days of wall clock time to run all of the tests. And now we highly parallelize these things, and we make hundreds of changes a day. So we're pushing large numbers, running millions and millions of tests in order to ship up to 100 times a day to production. And this is the entire way we work. Like if we can't ship, we're down to a certain extent. Like we treat it as a P1 event. If it's a flaky test, if it's something stuck in the pipelines or whatever, it's just, we are so addicted to this stuff that once it's removed, it's very noticeable if we can't ship at any moment in time. And two things started happening. One was we started getting a lot of flaky tests in the environment. So we had rolled out Rotoscope in kind of the previous year or so. And so Shopify's Rotoscope, what we use it for is to identify changes where we can run a subset of tests and not the entire test suite. And when you have a test suite the size of ours, this buys you back a huge amount of compute and potential cost optimization for running all these tests. It doesn't buy you too much in terms of the time it takes, because it's always going to be your slowest test that will kind of dictate that. And there's a lot of setup and teardown. But so this increased velocity and this use of Rotoscope just started causing more and more retries, more and more flaky tests. So if any test fails in our pipeline, we just automatically retry it. The way things will go is like if something is like legitimately flaky, is it will fail with one seed or one order in one order, but it will be fine next time. And when you're shipping all day, this is kind of fine. You just ship it, like 5 minutes later, it'll be fine because the test will have run again, and the seed will be different, and then the order will be different, and your code gets out. You get to some sort of critical mass of where you get this small number of flaky tests, and then suddenly they're tripping over each other multiple times. And this is bad at this point. Additionally, we saw like a non-linear, or maybe like linear but growing faster than the rate of throughput of the cost of this system.
Yeah.
And when I say like CI blew up, it's mostly like the cost was growing like faster than our business, and our business is growing fast. So this is bad. And so obviously we didn't turn it off. You know, we were still shipping hundreds of times a day, but we were uncomfortable with the rate of growth and the amount of failed tests through it. How do we fix this? We just got down to a classic kind of tuning, fix up kind of cycle. We resized the hosts that we were running on it. Like basically everything was in scope. We looked at everything from where are we running these things? Should we remove spot hosts to buy stability? Because we use aggressive users of spot hosts. A spot host is a host that you can get from Amazon. It is like preemptible, or rather it can be removed at any moment in time. But for the privilege of this, you pay a lot less money. And so Amazon get to benefit from being able to do dynamic capacity management. And so they're kind of selling off like spare hardware. It's not quite spare, but they're able to, because they can take it back, they're able to make money out of it in different ways. So it helps their margins, and it helps us because you can just get compute. And for things like tests, you know, it's very appropriate to run these on hardware, because hardware can go away. And you just rerun the test. But you still have to tune things to work it well. If a host is signaling that it's about to shut down, you don't want it picking up new tests and stuff like that. So there's just a amount of tuning and stuff like that you need to do in these cases. And so like we stopped using Spot for a bit just to kind of stabilize things, keep things working well. And then it was a case of like looking at every single bit of performance and squeeze out what we could. There was no like one big change. It's like, oh, you just need to do this one magic thing, and then your tests will be in great shape. We applied the classic, boring scientific method, like use observability to understand where the bottlenecks are. Turns out it's mostly, for us, it was in a load of factories. And we have all these big kind of semi-God objects in Intercom, like conversations and workspaces and these very common things that had a lot of heavyweight setup that was being invoked hundreds of thousands of times across our test suite. And it just turned out that you could do cheaper ways of doing a bunch of these things. Or we had, say, a very deep conversation object that was able to be used on virtually any kind of test. And it's like, well, we could actually just make a lightweight one and only do all of the complex stuff when it's kind of needed. And so, again, not kind of rocket science, but you just need to be able to get that kind of feedback loop of like, okay, let's identify the places where the time has actually been spent the most. We're able to use Honeycomb to have like deep tracing information that shows us this, and then pretty much go after the sources of like the largest amount of time and flakiness, which tends to be in the kind of factory type areas. And then it's, once you know where it is, you've got options and you can start to attack the problem in different ways. But it wasn't one of these. It was like dozens and dozens of these fixes that then contributed to the CI system being pretty much in a better state right now.
Kind of circling back a little bit to the high increase in PR throughput from your team through Claude Code. Tell us a little bit about what changes your team started to in the engineering side. I know that we can talk. I'm looking forward to talking about how people outside of your engineering team are using, but for working on the development of the app rather than just focusing on the, using some LLM tooling within your product, but like actually on the development lifecycle, what sorts of changes did you start to make? And then for someone else listening, if they're going to start doing this, if they haven't already, and they're kind of curious about it, do you feel like they should make sure that they feel pretty confident about their CI workflow process and optimize that a little bit first? Because almost everybody that I've talked to has talked about like, oh, wow, we didn't really expect how much our GitHub actions were going to start blowing up in cost. And like, oh, if we're running out of budget here, it's like, great, higher throughput, but it's either humans blockage because there's not enough time to review everything, or they haven't figured that part of the process out. But I'm assuming you just didn't start doing this in like January over at Intercom, but tell us a little bit about that progression there.
So we started seeing the increase in throughput around last summer. That's when things started kind of increasing for us. It also coincides with when our CTO, Dara, he published a goal of doubling the throughput of our engineering team. And really, the measurement that we're using is pull requests. And so pull requests per head, per number of people in our R&D org. We've got the expectation that, when you adopt AI tooling and you should have more time to work on code. You should be able to produce more code than ever before and get more stuff done. So there should be a very natural rise in this crude measurement of pull request throughputs. And of course, look, every measurement isn't a measure once it's measured and all that. But I think it's still like a reasonable thing to expect it, that like life should get so much easier when it comes to the production of code, that there'll be a natural increase through this. We're working on our CI system. We knew that there was low-hanging fruit there to kind of go after anyway. So it wasn't surprising that it started getting into trouble. Other areas that we started working on, like, we already had a pretty good linting system, a decent amount of Rubicop, and some other checks in GitHub Actions. But we started doing more and more, just like getting more and more bullish, or like, again, kind of maybe looking a little down the line, but like, as you're seeing more code being produced, you want it to be done just better. And Claude Code, God bless it, like it still can get stuff wrong. And without a decent set of linting guardrails, it can just start produce code that's confusing, or code that's inspired by code we wrote 15 years ago, which is even worse. So if we zoom out and just look at the amount of cops that we have in place, and even the sophistication of the cops that we have in place, like they're just way better now. Claude Code is really good at writing decent cops, and the syntax is a bit weird. It can be a little bit intimidating, and it's kind of like the counterfactuals that we never wrote these, and then we end up with a mess of code or something. But I'm pretty happy that we sort of started to see that this was coming down the line. Other things we did, but with like mixed success, was at one stage I counted and we had like 10 HTTP client wrappers in our Rails monolith. For whatever reason, people would like wrap individual service calls, or we just have like HTTP client and Typhoeus and all of these kind of peppered around the places. And so we started doing a bit of like consolidation of those things, kind of with the idea that like we don't want to be confusing the per LLMs. I guess I framed this as like, look, this is good for humans. And so if it's good for humans, it's good for LLMs. Like the agents just need to know the one way to do things. It kind of petered out, this work. It was hard to kind of prove that it was making a big impact. It's real soft kind of stuff. And I think it's easier just to configure like guidance to say Claude Code or whatever, and just say, look, if you're going to be writing a HTTP client, use this HTTP client, rather than do a lot of surgery across the app. So we've kind of ended up leaving in place a bunch of patterns, but then just telling Claude Code like, hey, do not use metaprogramming and stuff like that. And, it's not going to accidentally pick it up from the code base.
Okay.
So being like direct there was just more feasible than boiling the ocean on fixing the entire code base.
Just to kind of drill down a little bit deeper here, like let's say like approximately, we're recording this in the middle of April. 2026 for listeners. And I'm not sure exactly when this will get published, but right now, let's say you have I'm not sure where your team manages, like what comes next in the backlog product. There's a feature or change to be had. What's that workflow look like right now? Is it like, do you have a Claude skill? Like, is it engineer gets a ticket assigned to them and then, or they select a ticket off the backlog and then like, all right, work on this Claude and then just like assign the number to it and then it does the bulk of the work? Are they sitting in planning mode in Claude Code? You've mentioned Claude, so I'm assuming it's kind of standardized at the point. Maybe we can dig into the pros and cons there, but like, what is at that very, very basic level? Like, I have something to do today. Where does Claude come into the workflow right now?
Sure. There's a good few points here. One is that we've mandated that Claude Code is our tool. And the important point here is that you pick one, because without one kind of platform, it's very hard to kind of move up the level of like complexity or sophistication to build repeatable skills, to do things like all of the work that we do, like whether it's a Rails upgrade or fixing a flaky test or whatever, or responding to an outage or writing brand new features. Like all of this must be agent first. Greg Brockman had a blog post or Twitter post, whatever, earlier on in the year, and he stated that by March 31st, all technical work in OpenAI was going to be agent first. And I think he's a little bit ahead of us about like we have the exact same internal principle. It's like all technical work is becoming agent first. So if you're not opening an agent first to do that piece of work, whether it's responding to an outage or doing, say, some planning or research or starting to write code, then you're kind of doing it wrong. So now there's kind of different levels of maturity that the way that people will work with agents to get something done, and just the capability of an agent to like what can you actually do at the moment. Where we're at right now is like well over 90%, 95. It can be even higher some days. That's the amount of percentage of code which in our Rails code base that is changed by code, generated by Claude Code every day. We want people to not be reading the code either. Like I don't really open up my editor these days. We want people to like shut down their IDEs, just tell Claude your problems and let it figure out which skills to invoke and produce the right code first time. That is the vision. And we do see a lot of that. Now, people still, like a lot of people are still with editors. They might even be invoking Claude Code from inside VS Code, or they might look at the code after it gets invoked or whatever. But I think that like those levels of maturity where at the start you're kind of using kind of tab complete and then you're getting it to write most codes, then you're just not opening up your IDE, you're not really looking at code. I think most people at Intercom are starting to get pretty far down that journey. We're abstracting and guiding people away from worrying about the code, and their work should be plan mode style stuff or whatever. But, it doesn't have to be a big spec. I think there was a lot of chatter about like spec-driven development and people really tuning their kind of initial stuff. I think like chats, conversations, interviews, they're all like good way that you can invoke the agents to work with you. And so I tend to not produce like these giant specs and get it to do the right thing. It's more like interactive and kind of figuring it out as it goes along. And where we're not like universal on this is like there's still lots of work that is like artisan. The way we're thinking of like say the software factory is like if you want to produce IKEA furniture, like this is the software factory, and this is what all the kind of skills and in Claude Code that what we're trying to build and assemble. But if you're doing like pretty ornate, unique kind of work, maybe the factory's never seen this stuff before, or it's something new, like it's of a higher quality, or it's got a particular quality of where it's not appropriate to build a factory around it, then sure, we're going to have skilled artisans kind of producing this stuff. And I think like UI as well, like front end type work, Claude Code still isn't good enough at like detecting like, that's off by 2 pixels or whatever.
Sure.
I'm sure it'll get there, but there's still a lot of the kind of more visual work, which can be aided quite well with like a human in the loop and an editor in the loop. So there's a maturity level that we want everyone to get to. The vast majority of times people shouldn't be looking at code. We want that code produced to be pretty perfect first time around. And we're starting to see a lot of that. Our jobs, like my job at the moment, is just fill in the gaps. Whenever that doesn't happen, figure it out, find out why, fix it.
So to make sure I understand like where the agent first approach, is there still like a human assigning a thing to an agent like in their CLI, Claude Code CLI? Is that the kind of UI most of your team is working on then, the CLI? Or do you have some other machines running these independent agent Claude bots running that are fake people that are, you've given them a persona and they're like, all right, you're this experienced developer, like just pull tickets off the backlog and work on them. And then where are you kind of falling into that camp right now?
Yeah, today mostly it's driven from local Claude Code.
Okay.
So right now, if I'm paged into an incident, I'll just habitually open Claude, tell it, hey, I'm in this incident. Maybe I should automate that. That's even a bit slow. And then it'll join and figure things out or whatever. We are working on remote agents. There's some really good stuff published recently by the likes of Stripe and Ramp and others. And there's a few startups kind of building these things. Tropic are doing their own thing and all that. There's plenty of options, but we're building our own internal agent system. We know what we want to run. It's effectively mimicking the Claude Code setup we have locally. But right now, where we're at, we're getting so much value from just people locally invoking agents and kind of driving them manually. And like there's been some good features recently around being able to run scheduled tasks and things like that, where the complete advantage of being remote, it's certainly like reducing it. But for, I guess, multiplayer or long running or large tasks or scheduled tasks or tasks that need to be brought in through automation, yeah, you got to have remote agents that you can automatically get to join incidents or join Slack channels, whatever. So that's one of the things that we're working on.
Interesting.
But you can just get a lot done, just like without any of that fancy stuff. Just local Claude Code is a perfectly good way to get through a lot of work.
We've encountered this ourselves as well with some of our clients, is that individual developers are using the tools, they're submitting PRs, and they're still working through a lot of the same steps they've been working on, but they're finding like, oh, now the amount of time that I'm spending having to review PRs is maybe higher because there's more PRs coming through. And then there starts to ask the question of like, should humans be redoing the PRs? And then what's the purpose of a PR if the bot, or the agent created a thing and it supposedly followed my my linting rules or my Rubocop rules? How is your team thinking about those types of things right now? Are you removing any steps that were used to require humans, or do you still require, if you've like, hey, PRs need to be reviewed by someone else, but it could just be their instance of Claude Code, and that way you had two people doing it, but if you're not looking at the code, what are the humans actually doing in those steps outside of assigning the work to be done?
Yeah, so code review is the current bottleneck. And so this is kind of like the purpose of increasing throughput through the system. You increase throughput, you find the next bottleneck, you fix the next bottleneck. And today we are aggressively going after, our goal is for the majority of pull requests in Intercom to be approved entirely automatically and not have a human approving the pull requests. Now, we're not reckless. and we've been doing similar work for quite some time. So this is a journey. And we've been doing some kind of novel stuff or some interesting things to get there. But today, something like about 20% of pull requests for our Rails app are completely approved automatically by our system that uses Claude Code to automatically approve what we call safe PRs. Now, let's wind back the clock a little. Many years ago, GitHub produced Dependabot, and I love it. It's great. And we got us to automatically create pull requests for, security updates to different packages and gems, and great. And we would automate this, and we would open up an issue for a team, and the team would get the issue, and then they ignore it. And so we built up like hundreds or thousands of these automatic pull requests for, I don't think I'm unique here describing this. And, we've got a long tail of applications as well. And all of this stuff just builds up. But the other thing is, what are we expecting people to do? Like if I'm upgrading the JSON gem or something, am I really going through every single, what other than just running the test suite and pushing merge, and like what value am I actually producing, especially with like a super large code base? Like we just have to rely that all of our unit tests and deeper integration tests and smoke tests that we run and post deploy exception monitoring and everything, we just got to assume that all of that is perfect and that is working to catch any issues that a upgrade of these libraries would do. And so, a few years ago, we stopped having humans in the loop on these and just automatically merge GitHub, Dependabot, created PRs. Now we do it at a certain time of the day. We do it like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. We do them in batches. You can see them in a Slack channel. So it's not like they're happening at 2 a.m. And we opt out a few different gems, the AWS gem in our Rails apps. Like just don't do that. Don't do Rails. There's a handful of things that are like LangChain in Python as well. We've just found them through experience that you want a human in the loop for like a small number of load-bearing dependencies. When I describe this to people though, like outside of Intercom, they're kind of like aghast that we would trust the CI system so much and like not have a human in the loop and stuff. But I think the main thing is to look at like, why are we having a human in the loop in these things? The value is just incredibly low. We are way better off encoding the important stuff, the times when you do want a human in the loop with these things. And like, this is a thing that's respectful for our time. It's like, it's one thing just to do work because it's a process and because it's the way things are done or whatever. But we just don't accept that people should be doing this kind of low impact work. And we have a bunch of other deterministic rules-based automatic approvals. If you're updating a spec in our Rails monolith, who cares? Ship it to production. Like, you don't need approval for that. If you're changing some documentation, some other kind of bits, different things that we've kind of used path-based approvals for, we're happy to give automatic approvals. And this stuff has been encoded in our like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, all of our compliance stuff. Like these compliance regimes, despite rumors to the contrary, do not involve humans having to approve each other's work. They require you to write down what you do, have a bunch of controls and mitigations and risk reduction mechanisms and stuff, audit trails, all of these kind of good things. These are completely achievable with automatic review processes. In fact, there's no reason to think that we can't build better review processes with a mix of agents, rules, and like remove humans from it, and you get like a lot more faster and more reliable or repeatable kind of processes. So for the last while, we've been tweaking and tuning and trying to get good feedback into pull requests from, say, in our Rails monolith. Initially, we turn on Claude Code and say, hey, review this code. And it would produce a bunch of reviews. The reviews were terrible and they look like good reviews. And this is the kind of hard part here is like agents, LLMs, they're really good at producing stuff that looks like real good work. But they're very eager to say anything. And they will also be a bit psychopathic at different times, and they'll make a big deal, make a big fuss out of things. And so the first thing we kind of ended up doing was like, look, we got to put manners on these bots. We got to tell it, do not get involved unless something is very impactful. Keep it short. Also, if you got nothing to say nothing. And then also we gave different examples of like, these are good examples. Like, here are the kind of things that we want you to go after, and just started running that. And like the great thing is that we've got so many examples of changes gone through the system. It's just not hard for us to be able to produce a large number of like potential reviews. And then we compared them to the reviews done by like our best Rails engineers. And then we got our Rails engineers to grade the output from the LLMs. And so used the data and the expertise that we have and the LLMs to like build a bit of a feedback loop to make sure that like, okay, the output of this stuff, we're not just one-shotting a bunch of reviews. We're being really picky and careful about trying to produce like a super high quality review out of this, something that like we'd be proud of actually producing. We tuned this reasonably well, and then people will start actually taking action as a result of reviews. If you've just got noisy stuff, which is reviewing, showing up in everything, pointing out all sorts of stuff that's not actually that important, people just ignore the code review feedback. But by putting manners on them, by paying attention to what's important to us, and by having us in the loop, we've got a feedback loop, and we started getting pretty good code review feedback. And then the next step is approvals. And so it's pretty much the same process again. It's like, get your best people, backtest all of your old reviews and approvals, and figure out what kind of criteria you're happy with in your environment. And for us, so it's a mix of, we used historical data, information that we got out of our experts, but also just a bunch of things that we think are sensible. So I think like the perfect change isn't hundreds of lines long, and it's behind a feature flag if possible, and it doesn't touch, say, certain code paths, and so there's all these kind of qualities that when you look at a piece of code, is like, your question is like, is this safe? Is this safe to approve? And so we've encoded those so that an agent can figure out, is this safe? And if it's safe, we're pretty good with getting into production as quickly as possible and unblocking. Of course, there's other things that like code reviews are useful for. They're a teaching aid. They can prevent all sorts of other problems come down the line. But ultimately, we rely, or we're betting on us being able to put pressure on the system, get more throughput, learn from anything that does go wrong, and improve our like checks and balances and code base or whatever, or maybe even come up with new ways of deploying. Like our deployment system is very, very simple. And maybe we need to add more features to make it easier here. But like it's going well for us, but we want even more. We want to get like over 50% approved.
Yeah. It's hard for me not to just like, if you're already going through the process of like an individual engineer on your product team collaborates with Claude, ships a PR, then someone else has one of their agents review the PR. And it's like, at what point is the multiple people in that process really useful if they're not really looking at if the desired outcome is like, we don't even need to look at the code. Why not just have the engineer run a series of different skills? It's like, all right, submit the PR, new fresh context window, review the PR, fix PR stuff, merge. Like, and then there's no other person involved in that workflow. Like, why do you think it's still valuable right now to still have those kind of checks with other people? Because I think we talk about accountability. Well, the engineers are accountable for the stuff that gets shipped, but they're also like, but don't look at the code. We're just rely on Claude to do it all. So it feels a little bit like mixed messaging in a weird way too. I'm not accusing you of that, but I'm just like, I feel like there's like we're weighing up these two kind of like different spectrums at the same time. And I'm trying to make sense of it currently right now in my own professional career.
Yeah, it's tough. Like there's definitely stuff that goes on in the code base or say our infrastructure that I want to know about. And I think code reviews were the kind of the default way of like having this kind of gatekeeping or blocking mechanism. And it's a good way of like getting visibility into changes that are going on and stuff. I just think we can do a lot more of that reactively and also with agents. So it's just not that hard these days, say on a weekly basis, say, let us know of any changes. Let's say you're working on the Intercom messenger, you're in the messenger team, and like just give me a bunch of changes, or you can get Claude or whatever to say, give me a summary of anything that's gone on in the last week. And that will kind of keep you up to date. And that can solve the same problem of where a team are working in an area, they own an area, they want to have oversight of what's happening. But I think the act of blocking people from shipping is a pretty extreme solution to the kind of problems of like not having, say, specific concerns that can be resolved through actually having the agents in the feedback level or at the code review level say like, no, we do not touch that piece of code, or rather, you have to get a human involved because that is the busiest code path in Intercom or hottest code path. It's like, that's worth having the ejector seat go out and just like, just get a human involved. So I'm okay with like specific areas like that. And then there's areas like education and understanding what's kind of going on in the environment. They're not blocking. They're things you can do reactively, like after the fact that the code has changed. Yeah, I think there'll always be code and things that, again, like artisans are kind of writing in your environment, and that you'll still want oversight in those places. So I'm not saying that like code review serves no purpose or that like a lot of the functions that were going on weren't valuable, but the main thing is like most code is just not that interesting. And especially if it's been through like the heightened amount of linting, tests, everything, all the stuff that we're doing. And we're kind of forcing it into this auto approval mechanism, which forces the code to be like a small change with tests and blah, blah, blah. It's like you can really take a little bit more risk, or what would have been riskier in the past is like far less risky now. Like, for example, we're working on a deployment agent, like something that, and have an agent monitor 100% of deploys and do like pretty deep, like looking at the code, looking at exactly what metrics should be exposed, the kind of stuff that like maybe if you're pushing out like a big change, like a Rails upgrade, you'll have your best engineer monitor that like a hawk. But now it's like we can do this for every single change. We can have like the equivalent of our best engineer, exactly what they would do, and maybe even more, just happen automatically on every single code change. And so this is like this extra additional capability we never had in the past. And now we can do this. And again, it's like it removes some of the risk of like moving faster or moving like twice or 10 times the amount of changes through the system and have less humans or fewer humans involved in the code review process. So, but mostly I think it just comes down to most changes are pretty boring and just do not need that kind of blocking action.
It started like it always does. The developer said, let's just add this one gem. No ticket, no discussion, just a quiet bundle add in the middle of the night. Years later, your gem file is a cold case. Dozens of dependencies, no clear motive, and everyone insists it's probably still needed. Introducing Bundle Detox, the Rails extension that investigates your bundle and tells you which gems are actually used and which ones are just hanging around. It tracks real runtime usage, it follows the requires, it asks the hard questions. And when a gem can't prove where it was on the night of the deploy, Bundle Detox removes it. Bundle Detox, because in every Rails app, the call is coming from inside the lock file.
May reveal abandoned rake tasks, hidden monkey patches, and one dependency nobody will ever admit to adding.
Quite a big part of your post was about talking about building out internal skills in particular. And so presumably a lot of those are for your software engineers. So I know that this isn't just experimenting. I'm assuming, do you have is this one really large repository, or do you have a lot of repositories spinning up at this point? So, but when you're thinking about building skills for your engineers, but you've also been building a bunch of skills for people that are not, I'm going to air quote, software engineers or product engineers that are able to leverage those. Let's talk a little bit about maybe first some of the engineering skills that you might have, but then we could kind of pivot over to talk more about how you're enabling other parts of the organization.
My role is definitely on the product engineering side of things. And that might actually be the least interesting part. We have over 1,000 weekly users of Claude Code in Intercom. And so there's still a few people who aren't using it. Amazingly, we saw this completely viral moment of where when we got Claude Code set up and a bunch of people, non-technical people, started trying things out, and they were hooked up with Snowflake, and they were hooked up with a bit of help and support, they started doing the kind of work that they had only dreamt of before, where they can just answer their own questions, they can encode into a skill, how to get their work done. And so we've had this just viral takeoff of Claude Code across sales, marketing, customer support, just all of these other areas. The kind of thing to learn there, the lesson learned there is picking one tool, giving access, we've got good controls over Snowflake data, good access to tooling. And we had a core team of people just setting them up with great MCP configs and technical support. You just need a lot of technical support for this work. And if that's not there, then you're going to have a bad time. That's the stuff that's been happening outside of R&D, and it's extremely powerful. We're seeing people just having so much fun. They're doing the best work of their career. They're coming out constantly in internal channels saying this is transformative. I no longer have to wait for months for an analyst to do some query or something like that. I can just turn around stuff and iterate, and now I can understand my customer better. I can understand this analysis better, or whatever. It's so amazing to see. And we're just using regular Claude Code for this as well. The core of all of this and what we're doing in R&D is kind of very similar. So we have a base plugin. So we use the plugin system in Claude Code. That base plugin has basic telemetry and safety built in. So we hook up Claude Code to send hooks to Honeycomb. That will include the basic metadata out of every single skill call, every single session. And the reason why we put this into Honeycomb is so that anyone can kind of explore it. If you're developing a skill or whatever, you can go in and dig through this data, see how it's invoked and stuff like that. We also collect every bit of session data. So they get pushed to, so the full Claude Code session, which is usually a giant JSON file or something, we copy it off to S3. We slightly anonymize them on the way. There's only so much anonymization you can do, but we just make it slightly less easy to figure out who it is. And there's a bunch of people who we don't do it, if legal or finance or whatever, we probably don't want to look at their sessions. But we copy this data off to S3 for reasons of quality control, feedback loop, figuring out what's going inside, and really looking for there's gold in there a bit, what people are doing and how they're going about it, and is the stuff working well. And then we've got a core plugins for general purpose developers, developer work. And so this would be everything that would govern or dictate how we do, say, fixing a flaky spec or doing opening a pull request, just all of these kind of core functions, stuff that everyone does across all of Intercom. And we have a very high bar for those skills. those skills would all have to have evals, so effectively tests. They would have to adhere to not just the Anthropic skill kind of guide, but we have internal kind of skill guides as well, and skill improvement skills. And yeah, and so like this is like the top tier. Like skills would graduate into this kind of environment. And once there, it's like we're committed to maintaining and making sure that these kind of core skills work extremely well. Then we've had an explosion of team-specific plugins, and this makes like it easier for teams to build out skills that might be unusable for anyone else. It's like really fitting their workflow or tooling or area. And I guess the quality bar can be lower. Like you kind of want to encourage these workflows. You can afford to have it more opinionated about the setup. I think in the core skills, we want it to be very unopinionated, should be adoptable by anyone and stuff like that. But for team-specific stuff, at this point, you're getting a bit more closer to like personal workflows where, overfitting to your preferences is exactly what you want. But there's still like plenty of useful stuff in there. Or you might have like a load of skills that are extremely high quality and done to the same standard, but you just don't want everyone using them. So for example, we have a skill that does Rails upgrades. And we've been developing this over the last few months. We've been running in production the bleeding edge of Rails, doing a weekly upgrade. And the work there, it's kind of repetitive. It's not that fun. Like it's very important. I think it's great and awesome stuff. But like encoding as many of these individual steps into a high quality skill that's repeatable and where we practice real continuous improvement. And it's not just like a one shot, hope for the best. So that skill would be an extremely high quality skill, but there's only one team that we want actually upgrading Rails apps. And so we just hide that stuff away. We don't want people accidentally upgrading the Rails app. And then, you get into a whole super long tail of people just writing their own personal functionality or personal workflows and stuff like that. And our thinking on this is to be very liberal on like letting people build skills, letting people build marketplaces, like get stuff built and distributed, partially because we want people to learn about this and get started. The other is like, we might have, say, 3 or 4 skills that actually overlap. Now, we're big believers in small skills. They need to be discrete and testable. There needs to be a unit to test, And so monolith kind of skills that try and do many, many different things, I think they're bad. You can assemble smaller skills into like monolith type skills, whatever. Maybe like they discovered them along the way. And I think that's fine. But we want like the core things to be super small and not very opinionated. Maybe you might have like an investigate a bug kind of skill, and we're okay with say 10 of these existing, and then we'll try and pull out the good stuff, or like look at the session data and see what bits are usable, see which bit are getting good results. So we're happy to let many seeds grow or many flowers grow, and then kind of hopefully pick out the best stuff. So we're starting to do that, but the main thing is to get like momentum and get these things out there, and then try and pick out the good stuff rather than going slow and like hoping that like people will figure out what the good stuff is.
Sure. One thing that stands out, as you're talking through this, what you're building over there, Intercom, is like you've got these parts of the system that kind of need to behave consistently, at least fairly, every time, and then there's probably parts where you're relying on the model to interpret things a bit more flexibly. So for folks listening who might not think about it in those terms, like how would you explain that difference? Is that like, what do they say, deterministic and indeterminate?
Like I think even today in our environment, which is well set up with guidance and all this kind of stuff, Claude Code really will struggle with very open-ended kind of problems. We had one of our most important alarms fire about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was at the weekend. This is our alarm that we use that tracks effectively Intercom inbox usage, and it's kind of one of these classic SLOs. Like it records the user behavior, and if our customers can't reply to their customers, they're not sending replies, and that deviates outside of a certain statistical kind of prediction, then something's gone wrong. Like, so the database has slowed down, or maybe the internet has slowed down. In some cases, even like Carnival in Brazil has caused this to kind of go off course. And so our the engineer who was on call this weekend did what I would do, which is like, oh, I got paged. I'm going to tell Claude about this, and Claude can kind of help work on this in parallel. And Claude Code came up with lots of very interesting ideas as to what had happened. So it was the weekend of kind of quiet, but it started like blaming changes that were made like the day before. And, maybe it might, but like this was a pretty short drop and a recovery. This was like, it wasn't some sort of latent bug that was only going to kick in hours later. And then it started just looking at other things and coming up with like plausible ideas. And honestly, like they fooled the engineer who was on call, or rather they sent them down like multiple different ways. And they kind of ended up settling on one of these, like, yeah, maybe it was that. And I took a look a couple of hours later and did a bit of digging. It's like, this looks weird. It ended up being an eventual consistency problem on Datadog's metrics, which isn't the most obvious thing you would come to, like not an obvious kind of conclusion. And so for a few minutes, I was pretty happy. I was like, I've still got it. I can outsmart the LLMs. Yeah. And these kind of novel cases, you kind of come across them once and you encode them, and then maybe Claude will just check every single time and stuff. And so, you just do this a number of times and you've got like 99% of your kind of edge cases kind of covered. But that whole like confidence thing, or like going down kind of wrong paths, or like when it doesn't have a particular goal in mind, when it's more open-ended, I find that it can give plausible answers, but like you really have to be pretty skilled at times to go like, no, I don't think that's not quite right. Doesn't kind of feel right. The vibes are wrong. And this is like one example, and it's not the most important case in the world, but like this was a very experienced engineer who was working with Claude, trying to solve an issue. But in isolation, even though he's both very Intercom experienced and one of our best AI engineers, to be honest, he couldn't convince it, or he was kind of happy for the LLM to kind of come to a conclusion that in the end wasn't accurate or satisfying. And, enough of these happen, you start to build up maybe some wrong ideas about the production environment, or did you actually solve the root cause of the problem? Yeah. And for sure, humans do this all the time, but like doing this at scale or more, but also knowing if you got something more deterministic, that you can really get something like incredible out of Claude Code. But then there's certain types of work which looks kind of similar, but it just really flails and can lead you down. Like it is worse to be brought down, load of red herrings than it is to like simply have Claude admit, no, I have no idea what happened.
Like, how do you think about that from like a pattern recognition thing? Like if you weren't involved in that process, I'm not trying to pick on that one particular person, but it was like in that scenario, like if they're like, well, they accept like this seems reasonable. I'll take the confidence of this tool doing the thing. But then if you hadn't participated in, is that part of your workflow there, that like there's someone else will come in and re-review a situation, or is it just because this particular thing smelled a little off that it felt like it was worth having someone like you spend a little bit of extra time digging in, like a second or third set of eyes into the situation?
Yeah, I'm kind of cheat here. Like I pretty much join every single incident channel. Okay. Like, probably not scalable in every single company, but yeah, I definitely apply like the eye of Sauron to all of our incidents. And if I don't like what I see, then I'll kind of take a look at something. A metaphor I've been using recently is, commercial airline pilots, but they mostly land their planes on autopilot. But they also know that they're going to be tested regularly in the simulator, or maybe in person as well, where they actually have to fly a plane in different scenarios and not with autopilot on. And so they know their job is like to inspect the output of the autopilot, to monitor and manage the autopilot. But they're also eager at times. Like they'll just turn it off. They'll say like, hey, yeah, they want to make sure that they're fresh. They're not just going to sit back and trust the autopilot. They have pride in their work. They respect the craft and skill, and they will, for whatever percentage of landings or whatever, they will take control and disengage the autopilot. But the rest of the time, they're paying a lot of attention to the autopilot. And I think we'll end up in a similar world. I'm extremely bullish that Claude Code, we can get it to resolve most outages faster than I can. And that's kind of the bar. And we're still a good bit away from it. But even when we have it doing that, like I'm still going to erase it or, disable it from taking actions and compare and contrast. Partly because it's my job to run the systems. If you're a factory owner, you need to really deeply understand the quality of the output and take the IKEA furniture home and use it and assemble it and all that. I don't think it's okay just to go like, yeah, it looks okay. It looks like it's doing its work. You got to be pretty active in that. And so that means that, even if we've got something nailed, like I would call maybe our Rails upgrades or fixing flaky tests, or there's all these kind of like well understood jobs that are deterministic that I would say we've got 90% of the problem solved with Claude Code. But even then, it's still like the case that I think we need to turn it off and act like a commercial airline pilot. And because without the ability to judge the output of the LLMs and really be an expert at it, you lose control of the system. And I think it's always going to be down to us to like make sure that the things are working well.
You say that, and then I have had conversations with aspiring entrepreneurs that are like, hey, I saw these YouTube videos and these people have 20 agent different role types, and I'm gonna build a brand new app from scratch and just have Claude build it all. And I'm like, it's hard to argue with that too. Like, well, if they're like, they don't have any customers yet, so there's like a new thing or whatever. Anyways, but I think there's like that, how do you do this responsibly? And you don't know what you don't know. And then I also remembered like 25 years ago or whatever, when I was a new engineer in the thing, I didn't know how to do a lot of things. And the only way I learned was because I had to just overcome whatever new challenges popped up, because there wasn't a playbook on how to be a PHP developer or Ruby on Rails developer in that first year or two, when everybody was like, hey, you shouldn't be using this new technology. Now we're calling it boring because it's been around forever. But there was a time it was almost seen as a little dangerous to use something like Ruby on Rails. Like, well, how are you going to handle this when you actually get like, when the scaling thing pops up, or you need a bigger database or whatever? And we're like, well, I don't know, we'll figure it out when we get there. That's what I keep telling everybody that's nervous about adoption of AI, is like, I think we're all going to figure this stuff out as we encounter it. And as long as we know that we're not the only ones doing it alone, if we're going off on some crazy mission on our own and like the rest of the industry is like, we're not going to touch that. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. I feel like the trajectory very much is like, okay, we all need to try to figure out how to get on board or adopt tooling in some capacity. You're mentioning that is the goal right now still double the PR throughput at this point, or is that still the kind of the metric you're kind of leaning on there?
So the good news for us is that we met the goal.
Past it.
Yeah. So I think it happened about 2 weeks ago at this point.
Okay.
So we roughly said we're going to, in a year, double the throughput of engineering and or R&D. And yeah, we met that. But now we're going to do it again. The bottlenecks will change. And arguably 2x wasn't even ambitious enough. When you look at where the models are going and the quality of the harnesses and stuff, I think 2x is actually kind of underwhelming. There's a lot of work you have to do to start all of the organizational change. We want to change how hundreds of people work with each other and their craft and their skill, and that's years of work. But we're trying to speedrun it, and the more work we move agentically, the less we're going to be thinking about the kind of lower level stuff. The same way that with compilers, it's like you don't really think about machine code too often. Our work will be focusing on the kind of higher level inputs and outputs. Still have to be able to go deep when you need to. But why can't it be 10x? This is realistic, I think, to achieve. And yeah, we're going to keep going.
When you mentioned earlier that you with your skills in, are you using rules as well in Claude or things like that? And you distinguish between the differences there? I know a little bit about this stuff from the limited amount of skill development I've done. Yeah,
we use skills, rules, guidance, hooks, and we kind of go through. There are different levers to pull depending on what you're trying to get out of it. Hooks are very useful. You can just force a behavior to change to kick in. So one of the earliest skills we wrote was a skill to improve the quality of pull requests, the description. So again, kind of out of the box, Claude Code, if you ask it to like describe this pull request, it will do an amazing job, a fantastic job of just regurgitating the information that's in the code. Whereas that's actually useless. And what we found was the quality of our pull request descriptions was going down as more people adopted Claude Code, because the most important part of the pull request description is the context on why, like what is happening? Why are we doing this thing? And even if you just leave a breadcrumb to like this GitHub issue or something like that, it's like, well, I know why this happened, you know? Yeah. A description of the code in English isn't actually very useful. And so we brought in like a rule to call a skill, when the skill would look at the session data and go and try and establish the purpose of the code change. And then if it couldn't figure it out, it would ask the person, like, I can't figure it out. What's the purpose of this? And that made a reasonable difference. But even then, we found that the things wasn't being consistently held or being called. And so we ended up using a hook to really force Claude Code's behavior in different times. And so, we'll kind of go through these, like see what works, see can we get away without forcing all of these hooks or rules or guidance, or see where we get the things. Evals make a big difference here. This is like, how you prove it either way, whether the behavior happens the way you want, can definitely help with that. But then we just use the telemetry, like ask people if they didn't use the skill, why didn't it? Like, are they using the right version of Claude Code? What version of the plugins are on? It's just like this huge kind of tech support kind of thing. And but basically involves you just understanding what's happening, why are people invoking things in certain ways, or like why are they not getting stuff, and then understanding the tools and functionality well enough to go, okay, we've got this rule in place, it's not being called, let's move it to a hook or something like that. And so we're kind of at the mercy of Anthropic, like whatever functionality, whatever next they're going to release or whatever. But like they're decent enough building blocks to be able to get the behaviors working the way we want.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I find interesting about that is like, as you're using Claude Code there, it keeps that a little bit more consistent. So you can, but you're also now following that as a moving target. Like if anyone using even like choosing any type of technology, you're kind of like, you're at the mercy a little bit about what they're doing there. And I think, has it been an interesting thing to like, is using these tools allowing you to avoid needing to actually build software within your product, like say some backend admin type portal tools that some people are like, hey, we need a one-off report thing, or you like, hey, can we add this piece of data into the interface so I can pull this thing down? You're like, you only need this number like once every 3 months. Here's the thing you can do from Claude Code. Is that happening at this point?
Yeah, writing code might be the least important thing that's happening to Intercom with Claude Code. The main use case that people outside of R&D have is that kind of exact like analytics kind of like making sense out of all of the data that's shoved into Snowflake and other tools. Like I don't usually like this phrase, but like we truly have democratized access to this stuff, in that just in the past, this data was stuffed into Snowflake and Tableau and these other places. And it's just hard to work with, hard to trust, hard to even know, like, is this the right field? Like it sounds like it is, whatever. And you can ask Snowflake, but Snowflake doesn't actually know. So like this like Claude Code skills for regular day-to-day work that could be in an admin tool or something internal, but actually if you go direct with great guidance, you can just pull out the information you want, like on the fly, ad hoc. And that's what's transforming huge amounts of work inside of Intercom. So it's like you don't need all of these dashboards to try and answer your questions. If you could just write your question, and then with Claude Code given the right guardrails and the right access, it just gets it right first time. And so like these dashboards that people would build and have teams looking after them and all this kind of stuff, they're kind of obsolete almost in a certain way now, because like what is the job they're doing? It's like people have questions about things and they just want to get the answer. Now they just ask the question and get the answer, which is and this is just seems way bigger than we can produce like database migrations reliably,
Yeah, it's interesting because I think about just the number of different client projects that I've worked on over the years where we're building out little things, little data interfaces, reporting dashboards or something. And they're trying to figure out how to optimize those interfaces, even though they don't always log in to even access those, but they need that data for their weekly leadership meetings. They can plug it into some KPI spreadsheet or something. And now we're like, can we just find you a way to get that data some other way? Or can we send it to your sheet? Or can you fetch it through like a written out prompt or something? It's kind of like you're providing different sets of endpoints into your application, and it's just maybe not through a traditional API. So maybe kind of moving back into the Rails ecosystem. You mentioned Snowflake a couple of times. Is that like integrating with like a Snowflake CLI tool that relies on, and then just some API keys, or providing things through your Rails app that then it's fetching and kind of playing a proxy? Or is it a bit of combination of a couple of those different types of things?
Today, mostly we have standalone MCPs. Like usually there might be some CLIs out there, but we use just like a local MCP or individual MCPs for different services. So, it means I have to auth to a million different things very often to do my job. But we've also been doing a bunch of consolidation into our Rails app as well. So we've had these admin tools for as long as Intercom has existed. Interesting thing is, like, when I joined Intercom, I saw like our customer support team say using the Rails console, and
user
they,
lookup.
yeah, they would just like it was like the way that they would query production. They would like, just go in there, type out some code, type out some stuff in a REPL, all good. But then as they became more specialized and we became bigger and became more boring, we locked people out of the Rails console. We obviously matured it, made it kind of a safer place to do stuff. But it started being somewhere that only engineers kind of went. Look, there's loads of good reasons for this, and it's if you can write a quick web page to do something, it's probably a better way of getting some information. So one of the philosophies we have is that if anything you can do on your laptop, your agent should be able to do as well. And one day I was in just doing some queries on the Rails console, and I was asking Claude some stuff about it, and then I was like pasting the output into the shell. I was like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I this proxy for Claude Code to be able to run code in our Rails console? And so we were already starting to build API versions of a bunch of internal tools to do, say, customer lookups and pretty well understood normal things. But I was like, what if we let Claude Code actually just log into the Rails console and do it over API, like do it over MCP? You can send arbitrary code, like building on top of all of the kind of safeguards we have in place already in the Rails console. And so I built it, and even I was a little apprehensive, like this feels a bit weird, and kind of quietly launched it, and then started looking at usage. And the top 5 people who are using this thing, they're running like hundreds of queries. They were just doing ad hoc exploration. They might be pulling in data from Snowflake, pulling in data from different places. And every so often they would like want to do something, and Claude would figure, the best place I can do this is on the Rails console, and I can just call this API to like do this little thing, do this little transformation, write a little bit of code, and get the exact answer I want, rather than like maybe trying to rehydrate it or suck in 10 different bits of data from Snowflake or whatever. And the top 5 users were all non-engineers. I felt so proud. It's like these folks would not have gone onto the Rails console to do this. And they're kind of just prompting Claude, and Claude is figuring out how to get work done for them. As a result, they're just doing a bunch of stuff on the Rails console via Claude Code. And so it justified, I guess, the approach that we had, which was like, again, anything you can do, your agent should be able to do, and then be like maximizing that. So don't just allow certain people to access Snowflake, or don't only allow, say, certain people to access AWS. I mean, I'm not saying be reckless here, but there's no harm in having a read-only view into the entirety of your production environment. There's very little that can go wrong as a result of that. And so why shouldn't everyone have the ability to send Claude, like get Claude going with a read-only view into production? Similar with the Rails console. If you've got like a safe environment to run arbitrary code, why can't you let customer support, or like I've had design managers and senior directors of product unwittingly run fairly complex Rails REPL pieces of code just because Claude Code is kind of doing for them. And buys so much productivity, and it's even hard to know that it's there. Like if I asked our head of product who was in there accidentally using the Rails console, I was like, hey, do you need access to production to answer these questions? They probably wouldn't even know to be able to tell you. But Claude can do it for them. And so being like bullish or being very liberal on access to things, and setting up things well, like you can really give people so much productivity and improvements in their quality of life. But you got to be able to push through like the apprehension around giving access to production and that kind of thing.
So, but and then that workflow, you did add some observability into that workflow, and like so you have when people are doing this, so you have to stay compliant. You mentioned like SOCs and things like that earlier, like who has access to the information, who accessed the information, when was it accessed by, I could imagine some people might be like, well, that sounds easy enough to say, but like at the end of the day, if someone's computer gets hacked, and like you gave access to all your production data, what's your kind of counter to that? Is that just like, well, that's just kind of the risk of doing business with anything that gets installed on someone's computer? What is that kind of compliance concern? How would you answer that question to someone listening right now?
Yeah, so for these cases, like these people had access to all of this data in the first place, like prior, and the Claude Code is kind of acting as a proxy. Now, for sure, it accelerates the volume, the amount of times that they are accessing it, and so gives more entry points where things could go wrong. From a strict compliance or risk management point of view, it doesn't change much in terms of like what actual data people have access to. And, so your job is still the same, Detection becomes more important because you're expecting more people to be kind of practicing this. Like people's laptops now have more credentials, more active sessions into things. Like so, because they're being more productive. So there's more surface area, I guess. And then there's the whole class of issues with like securing LLMs in general. I think that's very much an unsolved problem. And if you control the inputs or you control the harness or whatever, like you can control the outputs. There's definitely like new risk that can be involved as well. And this is where governance, making sure which MCPs people can connect to, where people are getting their plugins from, reducing the risk of like kind of garbage going in and losing control of the system that way. So we've been doing work there, and involves having robust setup in terms of detection on people's laptops. We distribute plugins and config through our internal IT systems. So we'll like lock down Claude in certain ways and make sure it can't do certain things. Now, does this stop somebody from downloading codecs and bypassing all this completely or whatever? Not at all. But it makes the default kind of safer and stuff like that. So I do worry about this. It's like the pressure on the CI/CD system. It's like you're getting this pressure due to amazing success. People are getting more work done. That is great to get. You just want to make sure that the kind of sharp parts of it are well mitigated. We just got to be constantly increasing the amount of vigilance that we have in terms of like the broad security system and compliance control system, because the system's doing more work. Some of the latest news that's been coming out of Anthropic and others about like new models and new security threats, things are going to get more exciting for security teams over the next while. I think it comes down to doing the fundamentals well. And, you don't want to encourage shadow IT. You want to make your defaults set up great and gives people access and control, but also gives you kind of confidence and auditing and all that kind of good stuff that you need to like make sure you're not being completely reckless or abandoning people as they're using these tools.
I hadn't thought about this aspect of like having people that haven't historically been software engineers and like maybe opening up a terminal for the first time to open up, Claude Code from the CLI or something. And are you finding that the adoption there, like people are kind of generally, are they intimidated by that type of UI or the terminal user interface, or is it kind of like it's a little exciting to them? And what's that kind of look like over there?
Yeah, the funny thing about this is that like how I started getting into computers properly like 27, 28 years ago was I used to run Unix systems that were run by students in the university I went to. And so we had news groups and IRC and instant messaging. And email, website hosting, all the kind of stuff that you do in like 1998 and 1999. And it was great. We were the most successful society in campus. The university I went to was very like internet friendly. Everyone had internet access, which wasn't always the case. But what we had was we had like the best social network. And it was a great way to meet people. It's a great way to troll people, just all the stuff that happens on the internet. And so we had like thousands of like non-technical students. Like they would be banging down our door looking to learn how to like use the terminal, so that they could do all of this cool stuff that they'd see their friends doing. And now, like nearly 30 years later, it's like my job is the exact same. I'm teaching people how to use a terminal because they see their friends or work colleagues use them and go like, "Oh my God, I need to like get started here. I don't want to be behind the times." But we're also seeing loads of like really interesting ground up stuff. Like our VP of operations recently released like a guide to getting started with the terminal. Like he sat down with Claude Code and like I think he had been teaching a few people that he worked with how to do the stuff. So he just like built this little web page or I don't know, a little application for other non-technical people to get started with Claude Code. And, he described it as like, look, this terminal stuff, it's real nerd stuff. And it's very off-putting, but just use my guide and you'll be great. So we're seeing this like amazing bottoms-up enthusiasm where if people have the motivation, and I definitely saw this in college and I'm seeing this now, like the terminal isn't that off-putting. People can get used to it. They just need to know that they're going to get something out of it. And if people are seeing the kind of productivity wins, they'll figure it out. They'll like get in there. Now, I don't know if they're going to be there like, installing Omezich or like, mastering the terminal. We might get one or two, but like you motivate someone or you give somebody a motivation, they'll learn it pretty quickly,
Thanks for reminding me of like the late 90s era, because like that's when I got into this stuff as well. And like it was like, oh, I can want to connect to IRC channels, or I'm telnetting to something, or connecting to some BBS and getting used to working on Linux machines. And then fast forward several years, it's like I think the era of when I saw a lot of adoption of terminals again was getting web designers and developers, like front end people, comfortable with the idea of using a terminal so they could use the GitHub CL, or just using the Git CLI tool. And that's when Omezich, came about, was because I just wanted those people on my team to feel more comfortable interacting with the terminals interface. I'm like, this is going to be so much better than this GUI GitHub thing you could be using. Now there's this whole new generation of people coming in of like terminals feel a lot more comfortable now, and there's a lot of like there's a lot of there's amazing stuff there, but underneath the hood there's still like a bunch of CLI tools. And so you mentioned, anyhow, I was just kind of curious also kind of back to the Rails part with the CLI. How does that connection work then? And you mentioned like there's some MCP servers and stuff like that, but like how does Claude know how to talk into the Rails? Is it a remote console, like almost like a really simple thing that maybe a lot of Rails developers might like? You can do like a Heroku run console, and Claude could in theory feed some stuff into that. What does that look like? How is that working and to connect it to your Rails production environment to be able to do things?
I mean, I didn't look at the code. I just told Claude to do it.
How did you? Okay.
No, I have read this code though. It's pretty sensitive. It is effectively taking the string that is injected as an API parameter, and it can take a multi-component string. I don't know what the exact terminology is, but it can have all these compounding bits that are called kind of independently. So it can take like effectively a function or whatever, like almost like a lambda, and it runs a bunch of checks against it, make sure it doesn't do this, that, and the other, and then it attempts to run it, reports the outputs, logs in the audit trail. So yeah, effectively like whatever valid Ruby code comes in, it'll do its best and try to just execute it.
Does that require that person to have the repository, like your main Rails app, cloned locally, or are they able to connect, just open up Claude from their home directory and then like have access to your skills and talk directly?
Yeah, no, this is running in our production environment. So they're connecting the same way as if they're SSHing into one of our hosts and running like, in Rails console. it is the same level of functionality. Yeah, and able to take in just arbitrary bits of code. It's not as powerful as like the console REPL. It is, you can't tab complete to find the old stuff you're running. It's probably going to run on a different server every single time or whatever. So you kind of got to get it right first time. So it's not as good an experience, but Claude can call it. And that's where the power is. And look, it gets it wrong many times. It'll send all sorts of invalid stuff over. But like when it gets into things right, it's like, it's amazing to see.
Interesting. So like someone that's not in your Rails engineering team, they can fire up Claude and then they're looking at that locally, that is connecting to production environment console, and then it can do some stuff there. How does the local context of Claude know about the code, or is it running the whole thing of the, like, how does it know to like user.where or whatever, like to generate the appropriate Ruby code if it needs to generate something new, or is it like running a specific method that's already been coded?
So we give hints. So we have like a skill or guidance that goes along with the call, and so that satisfies. It'll give us some examples,
Okay.
But then generally, when people run this, they're in the Rails code base. Claude from there can just explore the code base, figure it out, and that's exactly how I've used it. I'd be like asking some questions. I'll say, "Hey, I'm looking for this tag. That's, I want to find all the places that it's where this tag is." And so it'll be kind of back and forth between like explore the code base, run some stuff in production, explore the code base, run stuff in production, and that. So it's not just the running of the Rails console commands that'll be doing. It'll typically done with like either looking at other information or exactly like the code base that's there. And like that works generally well. Like it doesn't get stuff right first time, and there can be like gaps where it's like going off and exploring the code base and stuff. But it gets there pretty fast.
I remember who I was talking to about this, but there was kind of like this idea that, say, let's fast forward a year or two. Might there be scenarios where you want to ask a question of your data set in your Rails app, and normally you might build some code to reproduce that, and might there be a scenario where Claude or something will temporarily create some classes and methods in a Ruby thing, run it, overlay it like on your Rails app, and then answer the question, and then the data, like that code just goes away because it's never needed again. And then like what's the purpose of keeping code around if you don't need, like, how do you remove some of that dead weight in your code base to keep the context window smaller? Do you think something like that could happen? Do you see any advantage of that, or do you feel like it's like just too pie in the sky?
No, I think it's interesting. Like if you look at our rake tasks area in our monolith, it's like ephemeral stuff typically. It's like a lot of once-off stuff, but you have to put it there somewhere so that the code gets into the right place that you can run. Getting back to code reviews, it's a good place to like give feedback, or if people want to like check that their task works, they can get a review or whatever. It's an interesting idea, like that we would have more transient code that would like may not even end up into like Git or whatever. If it truly is a once-off thing, then like, well, maybe this Rails console MCP might be where it ends up going, and that's what does it. So like, you always want an audit trail. You definitely need to see what has run. Like as an execution environment, this sounds like a kind of appropriate for like these kind of ad hoc tasks or whatever. I'd probably want to invest more, make it a bit more stateful, make it a bit easier to get right or something like that. Maybe more helpers. Also, we got it pretty locked down. Like you can't mutate something in the Rails console using a thing, I think, at the moment. And we're not like morally opposed to it. I think we just only want to enable this stuff when it makes sense. And changing to like allowing full rights, we just haven't seen the need for it yet. Like it hasn't been asked for, and so we're very happy to kind of give read-only access as such, and then rights. We're kind of still happy to like if it's important enough to have something you're consistently writing on, then build an API endpoint. It's like one Claude Code session, and you can have all the validation you want and stuff like that at that point. And you get something that's that bit more predictable.
I think I would be amiss not to ask if you mentioned your team's kind of like at least made the decision, like we're going to work on Claude Code for now. That problem is solved for now. Let's just get as far as we can with that. And I'm sure you would pivot if necessary at something.
Yeah.
But it would have to make sense for that. But how is your team thinking about token consumption and projecting potential future costs? There's like, because some people are like, well, how are you, is it premature to try to be thinking about optimizing this stuff right now? Or how are you thinking, like, what's the current status of it? And I realize by the time this gets published, like your opinion may change on this. So middle of April, where are you at, Brian?
Yeah, we think the opportunity costs of caring about optimizing token consumption is too high right now. So we are not thinking about token consumption. Now, that said, it's extraordinary amount of money that we are paying in tokens. Look at Anthropic's revenue. And I think it's appropriate for us. We are very aware of this, though. Like, I think the growth rate that we're at right now is not sustainable. But opportunity cost, where we're at, and wanting to be on the bleeding edge, it's worth it for this spend. And we have like some pretty short-term wins, or sort of things that we know we can turn around. But right now we're just not going after them. I also think the harnesses are getting better. Even just some features this week that Anthropic released, they're very aware that people are spending a lot of time worrying about tokens, and it looks like they're getting smarter at like which model to choose here and there. That's good. I'm sure there'll be more improvements in terms of caching and different things. Like, I think our token spend will just continue to increase and have no sign of ending there. But the main thing that I want to make sure is that we're not being sloppy, that we're getting value for the tokens, that it's not like unnecessary burn. We're not like unnecessarily using overly complex orchestration harnesses that just burn tokens for fun, or that we're like pointlessly using Opus when it's a perfectly good thing that Sonnet could do or something like that. Yeah, I'm kind of at this point just making sure we're not being caught out by obvious kind of things. I think like we've seen Playwright in particular as well, just like burning through a bunch of tokens, and with some minor changes you can make some good improvements there. So I think we will be spending more time over the next while on like improving this stuff. But today, I think it's a very easy, a very compelling answer to just go, look, just spend. Worry about this in a few months' time.
But Brian, like, I got to answer to my finance people, and they want to know how much this is going to cost. And like, are you saying this is like just going to keep getting more expensive? How can I manage my budget? Like, are we talking? I don't know how. I think I say that kind of somewhat fictitious. I can't speak the word. But you get the idea. But it is like a real thing that some people are challenged by. Like, if they're not a company that's historically been on the bleeding edge of technology, like, and sees that part of their competitive advantage, and they're like, oh, we're trying to figure out how do we adopt this tooling. For those listening, do you have any advice on how to navigate the conversation so it doesn't seem so, I mean, outside of being like, yeah, upgrade to the $100 or $200 a month max account. Like, if you can't even convince your finance people to give you that budget, like, you're probably, but it's also not just that cost, as we talked about earlier. It's also the cost of the infrastructure that, your CI pipeline and your might increase costs as well. So, and it might be difficult to project those estimates if you're kind of a small team. Yeah,
like in many ways, working in Intercom is like doing this on easy mode, because we're completely all in on AI. Our CEO, like all our leaders, we all completely get it. And our finance team are like big users of Claude Code at this point. Like, we've had a lot fewer questions since they all started getting Claude Code build. I do a lot of work with finance, our finance team through back in my old life, I used to take care of our AWS account, which is our biggest source of spend in Intercom. And in one of my regular chats with our finance folks, I gave them a Steve Yagi article, and this was, I think it was called Death of the Junior Developer. And he was predicting, as Steve does, he had a few predictions, and one of them was like token spend. And he was saying like, hey, we're at this point, Like it's going to be 10, 100x in the next year or two. And I was like, damn, this CVA guy is pretty good at predicting this stuff. And so I sent it on to my finance guys, going like, because they were asking like, when's the growth gonna end? And this was like a year ago. And I'm like, this is only gonna get worse, and like a lot worse. So I kind of feel like I primed them well enough. And yeah, we got them Claude Code build, which helps. But more profoundly, or more importantly, like, we kind of think of this as this should come out of your headcount budget. This is not like sunk costs or like, treating it like some seats to JetBrains or whatever. It's just like a more profound kind of tool, and you need a different way of thinking about how to pay for this stuff. And I think like raw headcount is a good way to put it. Also, it's at the same scale of it as well. But then the other thing is, your company really have to understand how transformative and how much of a big deal this is. And it's your job to really break through the barriers, the controls, the concerns, all of the things that kind of prevent adoption. And one of it is like justifying token spend and stuff. And I think we will do some work to improve token spend and get more control over it. And there's loads of things that might end up happening. But like, today, I think most businesses, the vast majority of businesses, and certainly any kind of progressive tech business, just has to be running as fast as possible to this stuff. And if your finance team or whoever's in charge of the budgets aren't doing the right thing here, that needs to be immediate escalation to C-level or above or something, because it is so critical for us all. I wish us all the best of luck with all of the change that's kind of going through this, and that like, you either have a choice to do this stuff now or do it down the line when you may have already missed the boat. And so I think the urgency it's correct to act urgently with this stuff. If it is old school bureaucracy and budgets and stuff that are getting in your way, then you need to move as fast as possible to blow those things up, because you're going to look pretty bad in a year or two if that's what slowed down or made you roll out like a more conservatively at this time.
How do you feel like Rails now fits into that? It feels like that feels maybe a little at odds with the, as you earlier described yourselves as technically conservative, yet innovation. You're trying to stay bleeding edge in these realms, but do you feel like Rails is providing you a good foundation to be able to, like, we got this boring, air quote, I don't want to call Rails boring necessarily, but this boring stack that and the other technologies that you rely on there at Intercom, you have that kind of settled. It's settled. You're not looking to transition away from that. That's my assumption, anyways. Now we can like take some steps up like on top of this and stand on that work. Do you feel like Rails and Ruby has proven to be quite useful in this? Like, do you feel like you're really, really fortunate that you made the decision as an organization to use Ruby and Ruby on Rails early on, given where the technology is? Because I think if I go back like a year or two ago, something that I had heard was like, people were like, well, if the LLMs are trained off of available software, and is it going to be suggesting that you use other technologies because those technologies are the ones that are most available, not necessarily, and Ruby and Rails apps are not necessarily it's not the most popular. There's not as much of abundance, but the context window is a little bit different when you're just looking at the code itself. So that's a long, convoluted question, I suppose, but tell me like how you think how LLMs and Ruby maybe do or do not complement each other.
Yeah, like if you asked me 2 years ago or so, I definitely would have said that like we see better results with, say, writing React or Node or Python compared to writing Ember. We have a lot of Ember code or Rails. And especially kind of custom Rails or like the kind of Rails that you end up writing in a big code base, just something seemed a little off. The harnesses weren't kind of grokking things correctly. Claude Code seems to have like just vastly improved on that. I think like the discovery mechanism, the way it kind of, just greps your code a lot. It just kind of picks things up and is very fast on that. So something did change last year. That didn't seem to be only the models the harnesses just seem to be getting better at dealing with larger code bases. And so then we saw that as like, it's just starting to get a bunch of Rails stuff in our environment right first time. I saw some recent study that did kind of make a case for Ruby being particularly friendly for LLMs. I think if stuff is good for humans, it's good for LLMs. Like I think of a simpler enough approach to these things. If you write docs, it's good for humans. If you write docs, it's good for LLMs. Same with tests. Same with like short pieces of code. I think all of these things are there's many similarities to like if you do stuff that's good for humans, the LLMs will have a good time too. And I think the kind of craft, the design, the way you can get stuff done pretty fast in Ruby and Rails, the expressiveness of it. I think all those are like well geared for like LLMs to be able to like just write good code. Maybe it was like the LLMs nailed like Java boilerplate style applications or something in the past because it needed to be more verbose, and they seem to be well suited for that. But I think the harnesses now just can seem to run against like many different styles of languages, and I don't see it getting things wrong. I don't see it like going down completely wrong ways in our Rails code base. And I've just had some good experiences of like asking it like, hey, take this code, make it a bit more idiomatic, and just kind of does it. It's not getting stuff wrong. It's not like you're seeing a Python coder or a Java coder try and write Ruby, and you look at it, you go, it's like not bad, but not quite right. Like when you point it in the right direction and you give it good context and tools and all that kind of stuff, we're not seeing any problems with like quality of code or the wrong, like completely wrong approaches kind of happening in our code base. So I think like the future is bright. I think maybe the early days, what we saw with like sort of maybe signs that had been an obscure-ish language, that was holding things back. But yeah, I think in the last year or so, we've just seen things break through. And look, I haven't used many different Rails code bases. Maybe it's different if you've got something structured unusually. Maybe even like if you're using sorbet or whatever, maybe like that might be a bit of a barrier. But like, Rails can navigate, Claude can easily navigate our code base and produce modern code, figure things out pretty fast, write really good idiomatic stuff. I think the teething pains we had maybe 2 years ago, I think we're long past them now.
Before we had hopped on and so hit the record button, you had mentioned like, oh, it'd be nice to like be able to advocate for some things that I would love to see Ruby on Rails provide the community to help with some of those things. Like, so like, let's fast forward 6-12 months. Like, what would be like some ideal things that you would love to see kind of emerge in the community so to help provide tooling like this for other organizations and for Intercom?
Yeah, I think once you start considering like the agent as like the primary way that is like deploying the application, or like picking the technology, or like working with it, like doing agent to app, kind of figuring out like telemetry, observability, customer experience, whatever. This kind of covers a few things that we kind of touched on already, like the execution of ephemeral code, given the ability for agents to like answer their own questions or figure out how to get started or where to go. I think thinking of like what an agent first experience should be for like the Rails ecosystem means like kind of starting from first principles. Like, how do people decide to even install an app or like install a framework? It's not hard to get started with Rails. I'm pretty sure if you tell any kind of modern LLM or whatever to like, hey, write me a Rails app. But like, why isn't Claude picking Rails first? I was listening to the Cheeky Pint podcast the other day, and I think it was the interview with Google's CEO, and I think John Collison mentioned that he had been working on some side project, and then he was kind of finished, but then he was like, what language is this? Like he hadn't even thought about it until like some point down the line, and it's like, yeah, why doesn't my Rails or my LLM automatically just like pick Rails as the default and stuff? So I think that's kind of an interesting avenue to go down. It's like, what in the like kind of installation and setup and documentation and all that. That kind of like 0 to 1 thing, thinking of that as an agent first experience. What can we do to like make that just work out of the box? Because I think at the moment it picks Node or it picks, React or whatever. Like these are just the things that they kind of default to. So it'd be interesting to see if we could contribute to optimizing for agents so that like it's just picking Rails as a more natural thing and it kind of happens organically or whatever. So agent EO, but also like agent experience or something like that. I think it's interesting. And we've been doing a bit of work on the Intercom to kind of make Intercom interesting to agents as well in the same way. Agents as the interface, like web pages, dashboards, all these things, they're very interesting for people as when they're like the end users. But like an agent, same way that like all the things that you would expect to like the Heroku CLI to be able to interact with, and like people are going to be asking their agents how things are going, or rather it's going to be other agents asking other agents like what's going on, what bugs what errors have we seen today, or what usage or whatever, and then taking action on those kind of things or whatever. And so I would love not to have to write these APIs for console API. So having these kind of things either native or like well-supported community gems, and that add in like console 1984 gem like safety, and it defaults like really good patterns to make it so that if you do choose Rails, or maybe your agent chooses Rails, that it's the best agent first environment for you to use after that point, and that the agents can do everything, and that the kind of smarts that were put in place in like convention is used over configuration of that in like Rails. I think like some of those can just be reassessed with like, okay, maybe let's assume it's not people driving this stuff, it's going to be agents driving them. Then like, what are the tweaks or what are the kind of optimizations, or maybe we even have to throw out some of the conventions to be like more agent friendly. So it's profound. Like if you just think that or assume that it won't be people doing Google searches or looking at Stack Overflow or whatever, trying to figure out like what to install. It's just going to be agents doing all that. And so like meeting them where they're at, and like running stuff down the line as well. So meeting them where they're at and making it compelling, because the agents, God bless them, they will do whatever it takes to solve the problem being given to them. And if the path of least resistance is to configure a Rails app or to like turn on something that's already configured in Rails rather than doing something else, then that'll make it more compelling to kind of use them. So I think agent experience really matters, and it's not just true of SaaS companies or frameworks. Like all software vendors, everyone needs to be kind of thinking about this. How
do we solicit feedback from the agents to make sure that we're giving them a good user experience?
That's a good point. If somebody asked me that internally in Intercom, I'd be like, oh, just write some evals, like figure it out, like write some tests and figure out where like the breaking points are or something like that. And like certainly that can kind of give you a benchmark over time, I guess. You can ask them sometimes, you can get some useful stuff out of that, like dive into your session data and like answer why you kind of decided these things. But honestly, I don't think they're just not self-aware. Like they'll regurgitate a plausible answer, but it may not actually describe what's going on. I think some of it's like basic SEO type stuff, but also like there's stuff that we can do, like making developer docs accessible over Markdown, making search accessible, things like that.
Interesting.
So that it's not just you end up in a cool looking landing site. It's like your agent needs the same experience as well. That like when they go and like look for some docs or whatever, it's like super fast and they just get there in fewer steps.
I hadn't thought about like that lower level there of like, if anyone has an API right now and they provide API clients, but also provide like, there's, DHH is talking about how they're building some CLI tools, and Intercom, I think, is doing the same, and everybody's trying to build CLI tools for their APIs. How do you optimize those doc sites? And it's like, maybe you don't render them the same way because you don't need to have all the visual stuff. You want to make that as quick as possible because it takes more tokens, I would imagine, to read our web page, and it's got all those fancy graphics you have and like little visuals and videos. It's probably not going to sit down and watch a video.
No, but you can summarize and give transcripts and all this, and it's like it's kind of like latency or something like that. People talk about like how many people drop out of like a shopping pipeline if there's like latency here or whatever. It's similar with agents. It's like the more tokens you have to burn, the more steps, like even if they get there in the end, if you can reduce that down to as few steps as possible, you'll get like a way higher like conversion rate equivalent or something like that. And I can't tell you right now, like that will obviously mean that will influence the agents to do it. But like certainly if you don't, I think it might cause to like exclude whatever. And I think there's a good case to be made for like Ruby on Rails being very LLM and agent friendly. So we should do the rest of this stuff to make sure that they can adopt it really quickly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, Brian, I again kept you far long enough, but a couple of quick last questions for you. Is there a non-programming book that you like to recommend to peers to check out that feels appropriate in this time and place in the world?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a technical book. And I mentioned earlier on, just like a few blog posts like Dan McKinley and other stuff like that. I like rereading the classics. By classics, I don't mean like actual classic literature. If you just know a bunch of core material pretty well, and you keep it kind of top of mind, and you remind yourself of the existence of the stuff, you can go a long way in tech. Like you don't need to read every book. You just need to read a handful of the good ones. And I have to admit, getting out designing data intensive applications recently enough, and just having a quick pass through it. I think like there's an update out to it or something like that. I think that might have prompted me to getting it, whatever. I don't know what I learned, but I learned that I need to make sure I recall this book and use it in my day-to-day work, and just like never forget the fundamentals. So yeah, sorry, a bit of a cheat answer there, going for an actual technical book. And it's a book I've read many, many times, but like I think it's interesting to like make sure you're still fresh on the classics.
Well, one more time with the title and the author for that one.
It is called Designing Data Intensive Applications, and the author is Martin Kleppmann.
Okay, great. We'll definitely include links to that in the show notes for our listeners. And with that, Brian, thank you so much for swinging by to talk shop with us on Rails.
It's been great fun. Thanks so much for having me.
Looking forward to chatting with you again. Hopefully we'll see each other at a conference again soon.
Totally. All right.
Thanks. Cheers. That's it for this episode of On Rails. This podcast is produced by the Rails Foundation with support from its core and contributing members. If you enjoyed the ride, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It helps more folks find the show. Again, I'm Robby Russell. Thanks for riding along. See you next time.